When my wife, Emily, and I arrived at the Halloween party, the place was already buzzing with energy. It was impossible not to notice how her fit figure was perfectly outlined by that skin-tight, jet black Catwoman costume. For a mom of two, Emily still looked incredible. Sometimes, I almost forget how stunning she really is. Meanwhile, I was decked out as a pirate. Hot? Not exactly, but I could have done worse. She gave me a quick peck on the cheek before heading off to chat with the other guests, while I veered toward the drink station, where my buddies were already deep into a lively argument. As I got closer, I realized they were caught up in that never-ending debate, Hulk or Superman. I couldn't help but laugh at the silliness of it, especially considering the supposed brains in the room. It's obviously Superman, right? But still, I jumped into the conversation, relying on the countless hours I'd spent as a kid buried in Marvel and DC Comics. I was confident I could settle the argument once and for all. Yet, instead of calming things down, my points only seemed to add fuel to the fire, turning the discussion into a loud mess. But honestly, that's just what happens when you mix beer with a bunch of grown men reliving their childhood. Eventually, we all agreed to drop it, choosing instead to focus on the endless supply of beer and the fun atmosphere. I knew Emily wouldn't be in any hurry to leave. She was having a blast, lost in conversation with her best friend Claire, who was also dressed as Catwoman. Those two had been inseparable since middle school, even though they couldn't be more different. Their shared upbringing led to plenty of jokes about being switched at birth, though they always claimed to hate that joke. Claire had ended up marrying Ethan, a guy who was basically my opposite in almost every way. While I managed restaurants for a living, Ethan worked with his hands, doing some kind of physically demanding job. I never knew exactly what he did, but I knew it involved a lot of heavy lifting, judging by his build. The guy was ripped, no doubt about it. Where my hair was kept short and neat, Ethan sported long hair tied back in a ponytail, along with a beard that gave him an Aztec warrior vibe. If I was more like Don Draper from Mad Men, Ethan was definitely channeling Khal Drogo from Game of Thrones. I never really warmed up to him, but I didn't dislike him either. We just didn't have much in common, and honestly, I only knew him because of Claire. Even tonight, we barely exchanged a word. What did catch my attention, though, was his choice of costume. Tarzan? In this weather? It just seemed like such a dumb move. But that was typical Ethan, always needing to be the center of attention. The women at the party, including Emily, seemed to find his whole shirtless jungle man act more amusing than inappropriate. It bugged me, to be honest, especially since Claire didn't seem to care. She'd just roll her eyes at his flirting, maybe throw in a playful jab, but never really call him out on it. If anything, she seemed proud that he could still grab attention like that. As the night wore on and the drinks kept flowing, Ethan's flirting only got more obvious. It didn't matter whether the women were married or not. He was hitting on them all. You could tell some of the husbands were bothered, but no one said a thing. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was just not wanting to start trouble. I kept a close eye, though, especially when it came to Emily. If he stepped over the line, I wasn't going to just sit there. Eventually, Emily must have noticed my tension because she came over to check on me. "You having a good time, Jack?" she shouted over the music. I nodded, taking a swig of beer as I watched her sway to the beat. But then, her gaze shifted, straight to Ethan. I could see her sizing him up, practically undressing him with her eyes, and it hit me like a punch in the gut. Jealousy flared up, whether I wanted to admit it or not. Who the hell dresses as Tarzan in the middle of October, anyway? Snapping back to the moment, Emily turned to me. "You know Ethan, sweetheart," she said with a smirk. "He just loves the spotlight." I forced a laugh, but suddenly, the beer tasted bitter. She picked up on my change in mood almost instantly. "Are you jealous?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Jealous of him?" I shot back, my voice a little sharper than I intended. "I don't need to strip down to get attention." She just laughed it off, brushing aside my discomfort like it was nothing. "Of course not, honey," she said, but her attention drifted back to Ethan, like I wasn't even there. As the night dragged on, I started to mingle more with my real friends, trying to put Ethan and his loincloth out of my mind. But it wasn't long before I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Ethan was getting way too close to Emily. I couldn't shake the feeling, so I started looking around for her. When I finally spotted them, they were in the kitchen, deep in conversation. And it wasn't just friendly small talk. It was something else, something that made my blood boil. The moment Ethan saw me, he backed off, but the tension in the air was thick. Emily, sensing the shift, quickly came over with a fake smile. "Hey, darling, I was just looking for you," she said. Her words rushed. "I wasn't buying it." "Funny, I've been in the same place all night, Emily. You two looked awfully cozy. What were you talking about?" I asked, trying and failing not to sound accusatory. She waved it off like it was nothing. "Oh, come on, Jack. Nothing happened. He's just being his usual flirty self." "Don't worry," she said, patting my cheek like I was a child. "I'm just a little tipsy, honey." The rest of the night, Ethan and Emily kept their distance from each other, but there were still those sneaky glances, and it was enough to make me feel uneasy. I needed a break, and with the beer starting to catch up with me, I figured a trip to the bathroom would clear my head. On my way back, though, I ran into Ethan, who had clearly been drinking even more. "Got a problem, Jack?" he slurred, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer. "What?" The whole thing felt surreal. Then, out of nowhere, he accused me of looking down on him, thinking I was better because of my money or something. It didn't make any sense. "You're drunk, Ethan," I said, trying to keep my cool. "Go home before you say something you'll regret." And with that, I pushed past him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. "Regret what? Like sleeping with your wife?" Ethan slurred, his words cutting through the haze of the night. I stopped dead in my tracks, my blood turning cold. "What did you just say?" I snapped, my heart pounding in my chest. He met my gaze with a smirk that made me want to hit him right then and there. "You heard me," he said casually, like it was no big deal. "It's not a fantasy, Jack. It's a memory." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "You're full of it," I spat, though I was no longer sure. Then, just to twist the knife, he started making crude comments about Emily. That's when I lost it. Without thinking, I swung, my fist landing squarely on his jaw. He went down hard, slamming into the drywall, the impact echoing through the room. I stormed down the stairs, my heart racing, and found Emily immediately. The look in her eyes, tear-filled and guilty, said it all. Ethan hadn't been lying. Above us, panic set in as people realized Ethan wasn't moving. "Jack, we need to call someone," Emily cried, her voice full of fear. But I just stood there, numb, staring at her. I didn't care about Ethan. All I could think about was her. "What the hell did you do to my husband?" Claire's scream came from behind me, and before I could react, her fists were slamming into my back. Someone pulled her away, and Thomas, the party host, rushed over, looking confused. "Jack, what the hell happened?" he asked. Ignoring him, I turned to Claire. "Did you know?" I asked coldly. "Did you know your husband was sleeping with Emily?" Her silence was all the answer I needed. She just stared at me, not surprised, not angry, just resigned. She'd known all along. Emily's hand touched my shoulder, her voice soft. "Jack, we need to talk. But not here. Let's just go home." I turned to her, and a wave of fury I'd never felt before surged through me. My eyes burned with tears I hadn't expected, but I wasn't going to explode. Not here. "He's waking up," someone shouted from upstairs, and Claire rushed back to Ethan. The gravity of the situation started to sink in. What if I had killed him? What if I ended up in jail over this? "Jack, come on," Emily begged. "Let's go home. We can talk." "No, Emily. You're going home with your boyfriend and his wife," I snapped, heading for the door. She grabbed my arm, her voice trembling. "Jack, don't leave me here. We need to talk about this." I turned to face her, my chest heaving. "I can't go home with you, Emily. I've already punched one person tonight. I'm not about to add domestic violence to the list." "Damn you, Jack," she shouted, jabbing her finger into my chest. "You want to hit me too? Go ahead, coward. At least it'd be the first time you've touched me in weeks." Her anger caught me off guard. She was the one who cheated, yet here she was, furious. "So that's it? I don't hold you every night, so you go sleep with him?" I shot back. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her defiant glare said it all. You know, Emily, I work hard to support us. Maybe if you had a job, you'd understand what it's like to come home exhausted. Suddenly, I remembered we had an audience. Everyone at the party was watching, eyes wide with shock and maybe a little amusement. It was humiliating. Emily wasn't done, though. Poor Jack, she mocked. Too tired for his wife, but not too tired for his adult movies, huh? Maybe if you actually paid attention to me instead of your silicone fantasies, I wouldn't have to tell my best friend how neglected I feel. Her words hit me like a slap. She was shouting now, fists clenched, tears streaming down her face. It was the ultimate humiliation. I had nothing left to say. Unable to take it anymore, I turned and walked out. Emily's sobs echoed behind me as I got into my car and drove off. This story, though based on real events, isn't from Jack's perspective. It's mine, Thomas, the party host. Yes, I now have a Jack-sized hole in my drywall. I decided to write from Jack's viewpoint because, honestly, the whole thing felt like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Claire's lack of reaction when Jack confronted her made me think she'd known all along. Maybe this wasn't the first time. Who knows? Maybe there's more to this, something weird like a ménage à trois. I'm just speculating, of course. But the looks between Emily and Ethan were hard to miss, and Jack was clearly neglecting her. Not that it excuses her cheating, but it explains it, at least a little. When a woman's advances are ignored, she's bound to look elsewhere. And if her husband's more interested in adult movies than in her, that only makes it worse. And for the record, Emily is stunning. Any guy would have a hard time resisting her. But there's truth to the saying. No matter how beautiful a woman is, there's always a man tired of being with her. The real question now is, what happens next? No one's talking, but it's only a matter of time before everything comes out. When it does, I hope Jack's ready. I sympathize with Jack. No one deserves what he's going through, regardless of Emily's excuses. She betrayed him, and now he faces the impossible choice of reconciliation or divorce. I'm biased. I've been friends with Jack for years, but I think he's been treated unfairly. Whether he stays or leaves, it's clear Emily hurt him deeply. And while we're on it, I agree with Jack on Superman versus Hulk. Superman's powers, like flight and super speed, would easily overpower Hulk unless there's kryptonite involved, but I digress. Mr. Williams, they're calling you on line 1. My assistant, Margaret, interrupted. Who is it? I asked, still lost in thought about the Halloween party. It's Mr. Peterson, she said. Jack. He'd finally called me. I'd been trying to reach him for weeks, but neither he nor Emily had responded. The chaos from that night still lingered in the air. It was the kind of dramatic showdown people couldn't stop talking about. Infidelity, violence, betrayal, like something out of a movie. Patch him through, Margaret, I said. Sir, he sounds upset, she added hesitantly. Well, of course he's upset, Margaret, I replied. His wife humiliated him. I'd be more worried if he wasn't. I waited for the click as the call connected. Jack, it's Thomas. I've been trying to reach you since the party. I needed some time, Jack cut in, his voice controlled but simmering with anger. Even over the phone, I could feel his resentment. I get it, man, I said gently. Do you want to talk about it? He let out a bitter laugh. Talk? With you? So you can write more about my life? Need more for your little story? I'm sure people are dying to hear about how I failed to keep my wife satisfied. The word stung. He'd read the story I wrote about the Halloween party. I didn't mean to exploit him, but now, along with being furious at Emily, Ethan, and Claire, he was mad at me, too. Jack, I tried to respond, but he wasn't done. Can't your readers wait to see what happens next? Is there really that much interest in the guy whose wife embarrassed him in front of everyone? I was at a loss for words. Jack and I had been friends since high school. We drifted apart after he went to college, and I joined the Air Force, but when I moved back, we reconnected. He'd worked his way up from managing an Olive Garden to being a district manager. He'd built a good life for himself. But now, my old friend was drowning in anger, and I was part of the problem. Jack, I'm sorry. I never meant to. Oh, I especially loved the part where I ran away like a coward. That was a nice touch, Jack interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I felt like the worst friend imaginable. Where are you? We need to talk, I said, trying to salvage the conversation. You know what's funny, Thomas? Everyone wants to talk to me now. Guess I've suddenly become the most popular guy in town. I heard the clink of ice in a glass. Jack, are you drinking? No, Thomas. I was drinking an hour ago. Now? I don't know what I am. I grabbed my coat and keys. Listen, I know I messed up, but I'm here to help. Tell me where you are. Screw you, Thomas. Don't even think about showing up at this bar. I'll mess you up if you do, he snarled before hanging up. But I didn't need him to tell me where he was. Jack only went to one bar, Moe's. Sure enough, when I walked in, there he was, sitting alone at the bar, hunched over his drink. Linda, the bartender, noticed me as I approached. This handsome guy yours? She asked, her voice tinged with concern. I nodded, asking her to give us space. But before I could get a word out, Jack's fist came out of nowhere, hitting me square in the face and sending me stumbling backward. It was no wonder Ethan had ended up in such bad shape. Jack could throw a punch, that was for sure. I wiped the blood from my lip and slowly got back on my feet. Linda looked ready to intervene, but I waved her off, letting her know I had it under control. Jack didn't even look up, just kept drinking as if nothing had happened. Now that you've gotten that out of your system, can we talk? I asked, sliding onto the stool next to him. He shook his head, still staring into his drink. Off the record, he muttered sarcastically. I couldn't help but chuckle, glad to see that at least his sense of humor hadn't completely vanished. I know I screwed up. I shouldn't have written about the party like that, I admitted. But I wasn't trying to make you look bad. I was just trying to figure it out myself. Jack sighed, staring at his glass. You hit a nerve, Thomas. You made me sound like I ran away because I couldn't handle it. That's not who I am. I didn't mean it like that, I said. I know you're not a coward. I was just trying to tell the story as I saw it. He took another sip of his beer, his voice heavy with bitterness. You didn't see it the way I did. We sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything hanging between us. Neither of us knew what to say next. All I knew was Jack had been betrayed, and I'd unintentionally made things worse. I just hoped that somehow I could help him pick up the pieces. How's your relationship with your mom? You've met her, right? Jack asked, taking another sip of his drink. Yeah, I still remember her frisking me to make sure I wasn't bringing any forbidden stuff into her house. We laughed about it later, Jack said, his eyes meeting mine. But for God's sake, Thomas, it's one thing to live through that humiliation, and another to read about it, knowing everyone else knows it's me. Jack, I just wrote it down. I never meant to embarrass you. I tried to reassure him, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince more, him or myself. No one knows it's you. Jack gave me a look that could have killed. 2 Catwomen, a Tarzan, and a pirate. Plus, the pirate who tossed Tarzan into the wall. How many Halloween parties do you think that's happened at? His fists clenched, and I could see he was barely restraining himself. Okay, you're right. I was an idiot. I'm sorry for putting you in that spot, I said, trying to defuse the tension. Well, I'm not sorry for punching you, he shot back. I rubbed my chin and chuckled. You still punch like a girl, though. No wonder you always got your ass kicked in boxing. That seemed to break the ice, and the tension began to thaw. After a little more coaxing, I managed to get Jack out of Moe's and into my car. Linda, the bartender, gave me a grateful look as we left. Take care of him, Thomas. He's going through a lot, she said softly. My jaw was throbbing and starting to swell, but I got Jack out of the bar. That's what mattered. The moment I buckled him into the passenger seat, he drifted off to sleep, looking like he hadn't had a decent night's rest in days. Instead of driving him to his mom's, I decided to take him to my place. On the way, I called our mutual friend, Michael. What's up, Richie Rich? He greeted me with his usual cheerful tone. Michael still acted like we were in our 20s. He was the kind of guy who could spark a debate like Superman versus Hulk at a party, always the life of the event. His energy was contagious, but not every wife appreciated their husbands hanging around him for too long. Michael, I need a hand. I found Jack at Moe's, and he's out cold. I could use some help getting him into my place. Damn, glad you found him. I've been looking for him all week. After what happened, it's a wonder he didn't do something drastic. Michael met me at my place, parking his Mustang behind my Tahoe. Together, we managed to haul Jack, 200 pounds of dead weight, onto the couch in my basement. It wasn't an easy task, but after a brief chat, Michael headed out, promising to stay in touch. Being home so early was a rarity for me. I didn't want to leave in case Jack woke up disoriented, so I fired up the George Foreman grill and threw on a steak, with a side of baked potatoes. I flipped through my cable sports package, hoping to catch a good game, but eventually settled on a documentary. Before long, my wife, Sarah, walked in with the kids. "Hey, what brings you home early?" she asked, planting a kiss on my cheek. The kids scampered upstairs. "Found Jack at Moe's. He was pretty drunk, so I brought him back here. He's passed out in the basement." Sarah looked concerned. "Are you sure that's a good idea? I don't want him pulling anything in front of the kids." "He'll be fine," I reassured her. "I'll keep an eye on him." As I said it, Sarah's gaze shifted to my jaw, now swelling noticeably. "Thomas, what the hell? Did Jack do this?" "I'm all right, honey, don't worry. He needed to get his anger out. If that meant a few punches, so be it," I said, trying to downplay the situation. "Rich, get him out of here," Sarah said, her tone serious. "Honey, it's under control. He just found out his wife was cheating on him, publicly. He's on edge and dealing with it all alone." Sarah's frustration softened as I spoke, and I couldn't help but crack a joke. Besides, my jaw's not as fragile as Tarzan's. Maybe Ethan should consider a new costume next year. Sarah chuckled. "Watching you knock out Tarzan was pretty amusing. I'm sure Jane wouldn't approve." "Yeah, Tarzan got what was coming to him," I added, grateful to hear Sarah laugh. Her sense of humor was one of the many reasons I couldn't stay mad at her for long. After dinner, I went downstairs to check on Jack. His snoring was thunderous, reassuring me that he was still out cold. I slipped a pillow under his head, but the smell of alcohol was so strong. I had to step back. "What the hell, Jack?" I muttered, stepping away for some fresh air. Hours later, a zombie-like version of Jack shuffled into the kitchen. His bloodshot eyes told me everything. He was exhausted, hungover, and still emotionally wrecked. Sarah shot me a look that said it all. "Keep him in line, or he's out." "How you feeling, buddy?" I asked, trying to ease into the conversation. "Like my wife cheated on me, humiliated me, and then ran me over with a truck," Jack replied dryly. "At least your memory's still working." 2 out of 3 ain't bad," I said, hoping a little humor might help. Jack's eyes narrowed. "My memory's fine. I remember your damn story, too, and how you socked me in the face for it." I rubbed my tender jaw. "That part's a little fuzzy. Maybe we need a repeat to be sure it's settled," I teased, knowing Jack didn't really mean his threat. Despite everything, there was no venom in his words. His anger had cooled, and even though we both knew the story had hurt him, I could tell we were slowly patching things up. "I'm really sorry about that story, Jack," I said, my tone sincere. "I didn't think it would reach as many people as it did, and I sure didn't think you'd find out about it." "I was wrong, Jack. People actually read the thing. I even got a message from this guy I know, saying he'd heard about the party from someone and then read the story online." "Who's this guy?" Jack asked, raising an eyebrow. "You don't know him. Loudmouth named George from Virginia," I said, chuckling. Jack snorted. "George Turner, huh? Heard of him? Nice guy once you get past his attitude. By the way, he's on my side and thinks you're an idiot too," Jack said, grinning. "Yeah, well, I'm sure he felt that way before he read my story," I replied. Jack nodded and chuckled, lightening the mood. I patted him on the back, and he didn't flinch, a good sign we were okay. "Thomas, why'd you have to make me look like a wimp? Did I really bolt like that?" Jack asked, still sounding hurt. "Wimp? Jack, you knocked the guy out in one punch. I half expected you to bite his ear off. If you boxed like that in college, you'd have been a champ. No one sees you as weak." "Screw you. It's a skill I've still got," he smirked. "I really handed it to him, didn't I?" "Hell yeah," I replied, laughing. "Bet you couldn't pull that off again." "Maybe not, but I doubt you could either," he teased, nudging me. We both laughed, and it was good to see Jack in better spirits. So, what went down after I split? I kept looking over my shoulder, thinking I was headed to jail. Well, after you bailed, Emily let out this wail and crumpled to the floor like a broken Catwoman. Sarah and Claire rushed to help her. Meanwhile, Claire dragged a concussed Ethan down the stairs. When Emily saw him, she lost it. She started screaming, blaming him for ruining her life, for telling you about the affair. Jack laughed. So Tarzan got it from Catwoman too? Yeah, Claire tried to defend him, but Emily wasn't having it. Ethan was barely standing, trying to apologize, but she wasn't listening. After that, they hauled Ethan to the ER. Turns out he had a concussion. He wanted to press charges, but Emily and Claire talked him out of it. Emily begged him not to, said if you got arrested, there'd be no hope of fixing things. Jack shook his head, laughing bitterly. There's no hope left for that anyway. I sighed, feeling the weight of his words. So, Jack, where did you go after you left? We heard the screech of tires, and I tried to catch up, but my Tahoe was blocked in. Yeah, I needed to get away. I couldn't handle it. Everyone staring at me, judging me. I just needed to be alone, Jack said, his voice heavy. So, you went to your mom's place? That must have been tough. Yeah, I drove like a madman. Honestly, I had no clue where I was going. I ran stop signs, blew past traffic lights. It didn't matter. I was angry, furious. I didn't care about anything except getting away. Jack paused, his eyes distant, as if reliving the moment. Then her phone started ringing, he continued. Emily's picture popped up on my screen. She was smiling, this beautiful smile from when we were happy. I remember taking that picture. I almost answered, but then I thought of her with Ethan, of them together. I wanted to throw the phone out the window. I wanted to scream. It was all lies. She lied to me. The smile was a lie. Her voice was a lie. Everything about her was a lie. Jack clenched his jaw, visibly struggling with the memory. I shut the phone off, pulled out the battery. I didn't want to hear any more lies. He took a deep breath, his voice softening as he continued. I just drove. Didn't even realize where I was going until I pulled up in front of my parents' garage. My subconscious must have taken me there. Going back to your childhood home, I said quietly. I guess sometimes when life falls apart, we go back to what we know. Jack nodded. Yeah, walking through that door, it felt like being a kid again. I didn't even know why I went there, but it was the only place that felt right. I could see the exhaustion in Jack's eyes, the weight of everything he'd been through. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would make it all better, but there were no easy answers. Jack, I get it. You needed space, I said, trying to offer some understanding. But just know, man, you don't have to go through this alone. We're here for you. Jack gave a weak smile. I appreciate that, Thomas. But right now, I don't know if I can face anyone. It's all too much. I nodded, understanding more than I could express. Take your time. We'll be here when you're ready. Jack let out a long breath, then continued. That night, I stayed at my mom's, just lying on the old couch. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop thinking about everything. What she did. What I should have done. If I should have seen it coming. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You couldn't have known, Jack. No one could. Jack shook his head. Maybe. I don't know. It's just, I keep replaying everything, trying to figure out how it all fell apart. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of his words filling the room. There wasn't much more to say. Jack needed to process it all in his own time. As the night wore on, Jack leaned back in his chair, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Thanks for listening, man, he finally said, his voice low. I needed this. Anytime, I replied, grateful that he had finally opened up. Get some rest. We'll figure this out together. The living room was a time capsule, frozen for decades. The same sofa, coffee table, and lamp, untouched by time. Strangely, the familiarity brought me a sense of comfort. In one drunken conversation with a Neanderthal, everything had changed. I used to be skeptical of those stories where life flips in an instant, until that night. My entire understanding of life shattered in the blink of an eye. Returning to my childhood home felt like finding stability after an emotional earthquake. It was what I needed, a sense of calm. "Who's there?" My mom's voice rang out, and I could picture her wielding a baseball bat, ready to defend her home. "It's me, Ma," I called back. "Jack?" "Yeah." The light flicked on, temporarily blinding me. As I squinted, I saw her standing there in floral pajamas, curlers in her hair. "What on earth are you doing here at this hour? And what's with that ridiculous outfit?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. I realized I was still half-dressed in my pirate costume, now disheveled and pathetic. "Long story, Ma. Listen, I'll be staying here for a while." I didn't ask, I just told her. In our family, affection wasn't something we bothered with much. My parents had always been matter-of-fact people. Hugs were rare, and "I love you" was only reserved for dire moments. That's just how we operated. "All right, Jack. You know where everything is." "I'm going back to bed," she said, her frail figure disappearing into the hallway. "And lock up." The next morning, I checked my phone. 29 missed calls. 15 from Emily, a few from Thomas, and others from party guests. I ignored them. I wasn't ready to face the onslaught of gossip and questions. Instead, I slipped out before my mom woke up, leaving a note telling her I'd be back. For the next couple of weeks, I hid at my mom's place. I only encountered Emily when dropping off or picking up the kids. Our interactions were cold, distant, and always ended with her in tears. Once, I overheard her talking to Claire on the phone, her voice hushed and urgent. I couldn't tell if it was better or worse that she wasn't talking to Ethan. At the bar, Linda became a kind of lifeline for me. I spent my days at my mom's, trying to figure out my next move, and my nights drinking away the pain. My dad was away on business, so it was just me and my mom, which didn't leave much room for deep conversations. She listened when I explained the basics, but didn't push for more. When she asked what I'd do next, all I could do was shrug. "You'll figure it out," was all she said. Oddly enough, that was exactly what I needed to hear. No coddling, just space to process it all. Living in a small town meant gossip spread fast. People whispered about my situation, wondering how I hadn't seen the signs. I even heard rumors of me being too distracted by other women or adult films to keep Emily happy. It was humiliating, especially knowing it had all been so public. Eventually, I shut off my phone altogether. I couldn't deal with the constant calls and messages. Despite the silence, I knew my friends weren't ignoring me out of malice. People don't know how to deal with things like this. They feel awkward, so they stay away, unsure how to help. That left me with my thoughts, alone, replaying every painful detail over and over. Drinking became my only escape, and Linda's presence at the bar was my only solace. The hardest part of staying at my mom's was being away from my kids. It felt like a self-imposed exile, but I couldn't face Emily. Seeing her was like walking across a frozen lake toward warmth, but the ice was too thin to cross. One night, Linda showed me a story that Thomas had written, Caught Catwomen, featuring 2 Catwomen, a pirate, and of course, Tarzan. The nerve of him, turning my life into a spectacle for others to read. Furious, I grabbed my phone and dialed. "Good morning, Mr. Williams's office. This is Margaret," came the familiar voice on the other end. "Get me Thomas," I growled. The next thing I knew, I was on the phone with him. "So, what's the plan with Emily?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Divorce? Separation? Or maybe give her a thrashing?" Jack chuckled sadly and stared at the ground. "Do I have to choose?" he replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I saw the agony etched on Jack's face as Halloween's events replayed in his mind, Emily's words echoing like a broken record. I hesitated but decided to ask, "Jack, you can tell me to buzz off if it's too personal, but about that adult film comment, what did she mean?" Jack blushed, shifting uncomfortably. "So what? I watch them occasionally. Not every day. You're implying she doesn't, or you don't?" He shot back defensively. "I do, but Emily made it sound like you were watching them instead of being with her." "That's true. Now buzz off, Thomas. It's too personal." "All right, fair enough. I just want to understand what went wrong. You two seemed so happy." Jack stared at his plate, his fork tracing circles. "She doesn't get it, Rich." "What doesn't she get?" Jack dropped the fork. rubbing his hands over his face with a deep sigh, tinged with sadness and maybe guilt. I work 10 to 12 hours a day, sometimes 6 days a week. I deal with angry investors, clients, sexual harassment claims, discrimination cases, and everything in between. If something goes wrong at the restaurant, I'm the one who fixes it. By the time I get home, I'm exhausted, mentally and physically. I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. Emily, she needs a lot of attention before we, do anything physical. It takes at least 30 minutes just to get started, and she likes to change positions, wants me to talk dirty, the whole deal. I love her, but man, after working all day, I don't have the energy to do that every night. It's great when I can, but sometimes I just want to be left alone. His gaze drifted, lost in thought. Every man dreams of a woman like Emily, someone passionate, who actually enjoys intimacy. I know I'm lucky, but there are nights when I come home, and I don't want to be anyone's husband or father or boss. I don't know. I missed something. How long had it been before the party? He shook his head. I don't know. I didn't realize so much time had passed. I nodded, beginning to understand. Then I saw anger flash in his eyes. But that doesn't give her the right to do what she did. I didn't humiliate her. I didn't cheat on her. She should have come to me with our problems. Why didn't she? I decided to take a risk with my response. Maybe for the same reason you didn't tell her about the adult films. Communication is tough, especially if you don't even know you need to say something. Jack glanced at me, frustration in his eyes, but also a flicker of realization. Touché. Sensing the tension rise, I decided to lighten the mood. So, Jack, about my wall? He caught the joke, grinning. Call it even, idiot. I thought the punch made us even. Not quite, Jack chuckled, his laughter a brief glimpse of his old self. That's when I noticed Sarah standing in the doorway, a worried look on her face. Her eyes silently urged me to come over. I left Jack and approached her. What's wrong? She pulled me close and whispered, Emily found out Jack's here. She's on her way. Damn it. Michael probably called her. What do we do? Sarah raised her hands and shook her head. Rich, I'm not getting involved in this. Jack needs to face her. He's been avoiding her for 2 weeks. She cheated on him. Haven't you forgotten that? I haven't forgotten, trust me. I've got a hole in the wall as a reminder. But Jack can't keep running. He has to face her, Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. I looked back at Jack, who seemed oblivious to the impending confrontation. What do you want me to do, Sarah? She softened, seeing how much I wanted to protect him. Be there for him, but don't fight his battles. He needs to deal with this. I sighed, nodding. She was right. I turned back to Jack, who had overheard part of the conversation. She's on her way, I told him. Jack rubbed his chin, wincing as he thought it over. Then his expression changed, his eyes set with determination. Fine, he said, pushing his chair back. I'm ready to face this. He stood up, straightened his shirt, and walked out toward the back door. I followed, unsure of what would happen next. Outside, the sunset cast soft hues across the sky, the kind of evening that felt serene and calm, almost out of place with what was about to go down. Jack, honey? Emily's voice shattered the quiet. I didn't respond to the alarmed voice signaling Emily's arrival. I didn't even turn to look at her. My eyes remained fixed on the sky above. Emily took my silence as an invitation, settling beside me on Thomas's porch, knees pulled to her chest like she needed protection. I've been looking everywhere for you, honey, she started, picking the worst possible way to open. I've been in the same place all night, I muttered, echoing the words I'd used when I found her with Ethan in Thomas's kitchen. She hesitated, confused by my response. Jack, we need to talk, she said softly. I nodded but didn't look at her. I could sense her pain without needing to see it. Her voice carried it. Swollen eyes, flushed cheeks, and sorrow. I love you, honey. That's a lie. I cut her off. Emily, stop. You can't say you love me and then humiliate me the way you did. I would never do that to you. Her voice rose defensively. What are you talking about, Jack? You did this to me. You stormed down the stairs like a maniac in front of everyone, shouting about my affair with Ethan. You could have pulled me aside and yelled at me privately, but no, you were the first one to air our dirty laundry. I paused, realizing she had a point. I hadn't seen it that way. Rage had blinded me. All right, Emily, I'll give you that. I was mad, but I didn't start this. Your boyfriend confronted me in front of everyone. I was furious, but I didn't cheat. You didn't have someone come up and rub my betrayal in your face. She looked away, her anger subsiding. I know, Jack, she whispered, remorseful. Do you really, Emily? Do you understand what that did to me? Her eyes sparked with frustration again. Maybe you didn't physically cheat, Jack, but you weren't there for me. Remember my birthday? I bought that special lingerie from Victoria's Secret, spent an hour getting ready. Do you even remember? I did remember. That was the day I had to fire Oliver, a close friend and one of my assistant managers. The allegations against him were awful, and even though I defended him at first, the evidence, those damn texts, made me realize I was wrong. I had to be the one to let him go. By the time I got home, I was drained. I didn't forget her birthday, though. I made reservations at her favorite restaurant. But all Emily wanted that night was something more. We went to dinner for your birthday, and we made love, I recalled. She shook her head. We had sex, Jack. You weren't even into it. Afterward, I tried to cuddle with you, and you pushed me away, said you were tired. So, I gave you space. Her voice caught, and she swallowed hard, struggling to continue. Later that night, I woke up and saw you at your computer, watching adult films and pleasuring yourself. The words came out in a rush, and then she broke down, her body trembling as she tried to hold in her sobs. I sat there, speechless. Slowly, her perspective began to sink in. Until now, I had only seen her as a cheater, someone who'd broken our vows. But hearing her side forced me to confront my own role in what had happened. I get it, Emily. I took you for granted. She wiped her tears and looked at me, her voice raw. But do you really, Jack? Do you understand how deeply it hurt me? The pain of realizing that, at your best, you weren't enough for your husband? After that night, I promised myself I wouldn't initiate anything again. I wanted you to want me, but you never did. I stared ahead, the weight of her words heavy on my shoulders. So, that's why you ended up with Ethan? He made you feel like a woman? She sniffled, wiping her nose on her sleeve. Yes, Jack. He and Claire did. I flinched at the mention of Claire. What does she have to do with this? Emily sighed. Back in high school, Claire and I got drunk one night, and something happened. We were mortified the next day and agreed never to speak of it again. But when I was at my lowest, feeling like the most inadequate woman in the world, I went to her. I told her I needed to forget, to drown the pain. So, we drank. And then, things got blurry. But the feeling of inadequacy never went away, no matter what we did. Her confession hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I sat there, trying to process what I had just heard. I didn't react to the sound of Emily's voice when she arrived. I kept my eyes on the sky, refusing to acknowledge her. She must have taken my silence as an invitation and settled beside me on Thomas's porch, curling her knees to her chest like she needed protection. I've been searching everywhere for you. Honey, she began, her voice soft and pleading. I've been in the same place all night, I replied coldly, echoing the words I'd said to her when I found her with Ethan at the party. She looked confused but pushed on. Jack, we need to talk, she whispered, her voice full of anguish. I love you, honey, she added, but I cut her off. Stop, Emily. You can't say you love me after everything you've done. You humiliated me. What are you talking about? You humiliated me. You're the one who stormed down the stairs and confronted Claire in front of everyone. You didn't even pull me aside to talk privately. She shot back, her frustration rising. I paused, realizing she had a point. Okay, maybe I handled it badly, but I didn't cheat, Emily. I didn't betray you. I didn't have someone flaunting my affair in your face. She looked away, her anger fading into regret. I know, Jack. I turned to her, exasperated. Then why? Why didn't you just talk to me? Tears welled up in her eyes. I don't know, Jack. I really don't. I wish I did. I sighed. And how did you end up in bed with Ethan and Claire? Emily's gaze fell to the dark sky. Ethan came home one night and found us drunk. Claire told him about my insecurities, and he started telling me how beautiful I was, how much he wanted me. Claire backed him up, and he suggested we kiss. We were so drunk, we just went along with it. Things got out of control after that. I felt my chest tighten. How many times did you sleep with them? She whispered, twice. It stung. Once, I could have chalked up to a drunken mistake. Twice meant it was something else entirely. And at the party in the kitchen, what were you and Ethan talking about? Emily's face tightened. He was drunk, saying how hot I looked and suggesting we go to their place later. I tried to quiet him down. I told him it couldn't happen again, but he got a little pushy. That's when you walked in. I could feel the anger rising again. Were you planning on going with him? She shook her head. No, Jack. I was hoping you'd finally take the initiative. I wore that Catwoman costume because I knew how much you loved Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns. I saw the way you looked at me, and I wanted you. I was hoping you'd take me home, but then Ethan happened. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt, but the weight of her betrayal still crushed me. None of this would have happened if you hadn't slept with him. Emily sobbed quietly. I know. I'm so sorry, Jack. What do we do now? I didn't have an answer. My head was spinning. Could we move past this? Could I forgive her? I don't know, Emily. So much has happened. It'll take a lot for us to start healing. She gripped my hand, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Please, Jack. I'll do anything. I love you. Just give me a chance to make it right. I hesitated, feeling that maybe we could salvage something, but it would take work neither of us had done before. All right, but there are conditions. First, we need counseling. We have to learn how to communicate. She nodded quickly, desperate. Yes, whatever you say. And you need to cut ties with Claire, I added. Her face fell instantly, and the light in her eyes dimmed. What? You need to end your friendship with Claire. That's non-negotiable. Why are you asking me to do that, Jack? I stared at her in disbelief. Seriously, Emily? You cheated on me with her and her husband. How can I trust you? Every time you see her, I'll be wondering what's happening. I can't heal if I'm constantly reminded of what you did. Her tears fell faster. You want me to choose between my best friend and my husband? I nodded. Yes, Emily. That's exactly what I'm asking. She looked devastated. I can't do it, Jack. Please don't make me. In that moment, the final blow landed, crushing whatever hope I had left. Her refusal to choose me over Claire was worse than catching her in the act. It wasn't just about Ethan. The bond she had with Claire was deeper, and no matter how much she claimed to love me, she wasn't willing to sever it. We sat in silence, the weight of her choice hanging between us like a death sentence. Emily's voice broke the silence. Jack, please, don't leave me. But I already knew it was over. She couldn't let Claire go, and I couldn't live with that. Less than a year later, we were divorced. Emily fought to keep me, begging me in front of my coworkers, humiliating herself. Even I secretly wished I could give her another chance. But I couldn't move past the betrayal, not with Claire still in her life. No spouse should have to share their partner's heart with someone else. A year later, the pain still lingers. We co-parent the best we can for the kids, but the wounds run deep. There are no winners in this situation. But this Halloween, Jack finally brought someone to the party, a date. She wasn't dressed as Catwoman, and maybe she's just a rebound, but it's progress. Healing takes time. Real life doesn't offer neat endings, but at least Jack's moving forward, one step at a time. As for Emily, Ethan, and Claire, they've disappeared from our social circles. Claire stood by Emily, blaming Jack for forcing an impossible choice. But to me, the choice wasn't impossible. Emily claimed she'd do anything to save her marriage, but her actions spoke louder than words. In the end, Jack was better off without her.